I want to keep bringing us back to the foundation and just doing a little bit of review each time that we move on to remember what we're talking about. And another way that I see life is this way, that God has permitted the fallen world that He didn't create to squeeze me to see that I have a need for Him. And so the world squeezes me until I see that I need Him, and I invite Him to come in and be my life, because I'm just discovering that in my humanity I'm not going to live the divine life. He's got to come and do it. But now, once the world has accomplished that goal of squeezing me and bringing me to the place of need, the next thing the world does, He allows it to continue to squeeze me to release His life and to put me in situations where I have to let His life out. And so there's exactly Christ flowing in the midst of the world, and out of my innermost being flows rivers of living water, and out of me comes something that somebody else can drink in the world. And it's often coming out of these situations that are continuing to squeeze me. Now, another thing the world will do for me is that the world will bring me to a place, and Jesus will be working in the middle of that to help divide soul from spirit. And it's part of my spiritual pregnancy that I'll go through an experience where soul and spirit are divided. And Hebrews talks about that the Word of God is living and active. It's sharper than a two-edged sword, able to divide the soul from the spirit. And we know that, of course, what the Hebrew writer is talking about there is Jesus Himself. He is the Word. The Bible didn't exist then. And so it's Jesus Himself that comes in, and He'll separate me from the world. And He'll use the world to separate me from the world. Do you know if you're in the world long enough, the world will beat the love that you have for it right out of you? I remember a fellow in my office, and I was doing premarital counseling with them, and I have to admit that the girl that he was going to marry was absolutely beautiful. And so I asked her to leave for a minute, and I just looked at the fellow and said, "What are you willing to pay for sex?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The woman has no spiritual depth whatsoever. She has none." And I said, "I'm not condemning her. I'm not judging her. I'm just telling you that as a man of God, this woman has no spiritual depth. You've fallen in lust with her. You haven't fallen in love with her." And I said, "You really need to look seriously at this and find someone that has a heart for the Lord. That's what you ought to be looking for." And I said, "And brother, I want to warn you that this woman will beat the love that you have for her right out of you, because she knows that you're attracted to her because of how she looks. And once you get married, she's got to prove to you that she's more than a body, and you're not even going to be having the sex that you think you're going to be having." And I said, "She'll knock this lust right out of you." Well, of course, he took the advice that most people do that are getting ready to get married and went ahead and got married. And in a couple of years, he came back and he said, "She's knocked the love that I had for her right out of me." Well, we had to work through all that, and in the end, God really did some things in her life, and He turned around. He was faithful to use all of that. But do you know what? You can love the world all you want, and in the end, the world will beat the love you have for it right out of you. It'll knock it right out of you. Now, one of the things that we do is that instead of loving men, we live to men. Now, there's a big difference between loving and living. And we're to love every man around us, but we end up living to people, and they control us, as we've been talking about. And so God's normal progression of working with a man, I believe, is that He takes you out of the world, He cuts you off from everything but Himself, and then you find Him, and in Him everything you've been looking for. And when you go back into the world, you'll go back into the world a completely different person. You'll love people, but you won't live for people any longer. And it's a beautiful place to be. I've seen men where this has worked out in their lives. And again, one of the older fellows, and I have a lot of older fellows that spend time with me, and they've put into my life. And one fellow I really liked, you could tell him that you hate his guts, you're going to beat him, and he's never going to be able to preach again, and you won't see a single move in his spirit. He's just calm and he's quiet, because he never was living for you. Actually, it does you absolutely no good to rebuke that man, because he was never living to you. When he's preaching, he's never preaching to the audience. He's the one that told the story to me about the fellow who was the pianist and finally made it to Carnegie Hall, and the fellow plays his piano there. And when he's done playing, all the media's down there, and they're asking him questions. They're taking his photograph. And they said, what's it like to play in front of all these people? And they have the adulation of all these people. And to see so many people that want to see you, what's it like? And he said, I don't know. I wasn't playing for any of them. And he pointed up in the balcony, and there was an old man getting up in his walker and leaving. And he said, I was playing for the man in the balcony. He taught me a love for music. He was my first teacher. And I came here tonight not for any of you, but to play for him. I'm playing for the man in the balcony. Do you know that when we're preaching and we're teaching and we're sharing, we're never doing it before men, we're doing it before God. I'm talking to him right now. I'm saying to the things about him that I believe. It's not before the people. And this man that I'm talking about, he just lives before God. You can tell him you're going to beat him, it doesn't matter. You can tell him you're giving him $1 million, it doesn't matter. He's in perfect peace, but he still loves everyone. Well, how do you get to that place? You get to that place as the Word of God that is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword begins to divide and cut you off from the world, so you have to look in the Spirit and find the things that are there. And God uses the fallen world and the people around us and all those carnal Christians and all those carnal people to work His perfect goal in us. Now, I really like this one pastor. He was asked if he'd ever been drunk, and he said, no, but I've had a lot of carnal people overserve me. He's just blaming everybody else for where he was at. But you see how the world is used in our lives. Now, in this cutting off, and we get cut off, here's what I think it looks like. You have a body and a soul and a spirit, and your soul, your mind, will, and emotions are like a little bitty baby. And a baby needs food all the time. Now, if you give a baby water, that baby's going to be fussy. But if you give a baby milk, that baby will be happy. Now, my soul was created to feed on the Spirit, the pure milk of God, Jesus, the Word of God. That's how I was created. The problem is, when I'm born dead to God, then my baby, my soul, cannot feed on Jesus. It has to feed on water. Now, my soul is made up of my mind, my will, and my emotions. So what happens then, instead of filling my mind with the wisdom of God, I fill it with the knowledge of the world. My will is very, very hungry, and the only thing that will ultimately satisfy it in a deep way is His will. But I fill it with my will, and I'm fussy. My emotions need the peace of God. But since I'm cut off from God, instead of having peace, what I end up having and looking for and striving for every day is a whole lot of happiness. Now, I find this very interesting, that when the Spirit comes on Jesus, it drives Him into the wilderness. Now, why would the Spirit drive Jesus into the wilderness? It looks like if you're filled with the Spirit, then you ought to be driven out into the world because, as most of us have heard, now you've got the power and you want to get out there. But instead of being driven into the world, the the sword comes and cuts Him off from the world and takes Him out into the wilderness. Why was Jesus in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights? And how did that wilderness experience prepare Him for His ministry and what was coming next? Well, you go out in the wilderness and there's absolutely nothing to do. There's not anything in the wilderness. And so when it comes to your mind, there's not anything to read there. You can't fill your mind with knowledge. Instead, you've got to eat from God and fill your mind with the wisdom of God and get the pure milk. And when you're in the wilderness, there's nothing to do, so you might as well do His will. And when you're in the wilderness, there's nothing to make you happy, so you might as well turn and feed from Him and have the peace of God. Do you know that for 40 days and for 40 nights, His soul fed on the things of God? He wasn't able to feed on the world. He was cut off from the world. And He just fed on the things of God until at the end of that time, He was absolutely stuffed. Now, we've experienced some of that this week where you just can't eat anymore. And of course, our big celebration in the U.S. is Thanksgiving. And you get the family together, and you know what it's like in Thanksgiving. Everybody brings the best. And you eat and eat and eat until finally the last bite of food you can show people because it's still on the end of your tongue. It hasn't gone down. You're absolutely stuffed. You know the feeling? You can't take any more. And then my aunt comes up to me and says, Mikey, I made your favorite pie. I made your pecan pie. Andy, I can't eat anymore. Do you see how I look? I can't eat anymore. We've been eating. Maybe I can eat it later. I can't eat anymore right now. But this is your favorite pie, Mike. I made this pie just for you. I brought this pie over to you. And she's holding the pie. You just can't do it. Do you know the feeling? I mean, normally you'd want it, but you just can't take it. And I say no. What would normally be a temptation is no temptation to me at all. Now here's the interesting thing. Jesus is so stuffed at the end of 40 days and 40 nights that Satan now comes to him with temptations that can't be a temptation when your soul is already stuffed. Why don't you cast yourself off of the temple and people will follow you? Well, why would I need anyone following me? I'm stuffed. I'm full. I don't need any of those things the world offers me. Well, if you'll bow down and worship me, I'll give you kingdoms. Well, why would I want kingdoms? Why would I want that? I'm absolutely stuck. There is nothing that you have to offer me because I'm full. Do you know that he's so full in his soul that it's come out into his body? And why don't you turn these rocks into loaves? And why would I do that? I'm absolutely stuffed. And the temptations were no longer temptations. When we're fighting temptations, we're fighting the wrong thing. What we ought to do is go back and ask, why is it a temptation? And then we'll find that it's because I'm not full and I'm trying to feed my soul from the things that are outside of me. Now, one of the things that we'll say about emotion is this. Mind, will, and emotion are a beautiful thing as long as it's not events in the world that are dictating my body that then dictate how I feel, then block the Spirit. But when I'm full and I let His Spirit flow through those things and feed those things and move into my body and move into my activity, then those same emotions can be a blessing. But it has to be peace that rules over that. And I'm only at peace when I'm being fed by Him. And so one of the things in our spiritual pregnancy that I want to emphasize is that we should have, along the way, a wilderness experience where we're cut off from the world. And it's His activity. It's seeing God in it. He's the one that's done it. But He's done it for a reason. And remember, when you're out there in the wilderness and you can't find knowledge and you can't find your will and you can't find happiness, it's because He didn't intend you to find it. He wanted you to go there and to have your mind filled with His wisdom, to have your will filled with His, and to have your emotions filled with peace. We said that we then have a different approach and a different paradigm and a different system as we begin to look at relationships and how people treat us and how we treat each other. Because we see God in everything that's happening around us. What is the goal of my life? The goal of my life is the revelation of Christ. Everything fits into that goal. Everything is working that way. Now we ended then looking at these bags that we carry, and we were emphasizing the unique self, understanding the uniqueness that God has made in you, and coming to understand the difference in people around us so we could stop making false judgments, so we could also minister to them at their real point of need, and also that we can come to a place where we love ourselves. The last thing that we looked at when we ended up were energy levels, how these different personalities have different energy levels. And we said that the thinker starts out with a high energy level, people drain their energy, and it dips off to nothing at night. If you're a thinker, one of the things I'd recommend you do is that you take lunch by yourself. Always get away. And it also doesn't hurt if you would have an after-lunch nap. They did a survey with executives, and they had two sets of executives, and I think there were about 600 in the total study group. But half of the executives, they paid them for a 20-minute nap, and they put a little cot in the corner of their room that they could bring out and fold out. And even if they couldn't sleep, they made them lay there for 20 minutes. And the other half of the executives just kept on working right through lunch. At the end of the study, the people who took the nap were 60% more productive than those who didn't for the afternoons. And so if you're one of those thinkers, it's good that you get away. The other thing you're going to have a problem with as a thinker, if you're a father, is that you come home at night and you're ready to crash and get away from everybody. And one of the problems you'll have is you'll just sit in front of the TV and you just sit there and die nearly because you're exhausted. And what you have to do is you have to come home and get a mindset that says, I'm not off work until 8 or 9 o'clock. And I can't just sit down. I need to go in and ask my wife what she's been doing, how's she doing. I've got to go around and visit each one of the kids. Those kind of things have to be done before I lay down. And then finally I can quit. And it's difficult for a thinker to do that because the energy level dips. The feelers, we said, start out low in their energy level and they're yakking away at midnight. They have a hard time getting out of bed and to get going, but they're going to be going full on at midnight. Thinkers and feelers marry each other. Now, when's the best time to have a conversation then if you're married? Well, if you're trying to talk to a thinker while you're laying in bed at midnight, what kind of good is that going to do? On the other hand, don't try to talk to a feeler in the morning because they're not even alive yet. So probably the best time to talk is going to be midday sometime. Talking over lunch. And I'll tell you this about thinkers communicating with them. Because of the domino effect in their mind, you should always say this to them. This coming Saturday, and this is Monday, Saturday, let's have a talk about our vacation and where we're going to go. And so you give them from Monday to Saturday to obsess on it, and to think about it, and to wonder about it, and then they've got plenty of time. And you know what? They'll give you incredibly good input if you give them the time to think about it. They'll give you some great input. What they'll do if you don't allow them to give that input is they'll immediately object to it from the very beginning. And the reason they're objecting isn't because they're hard-hearted and stubborn, it's because they want time to think about that. And another thing about a thinker that'll go well for you, and a feeler when you're communicating with them, is before you ever open your mouth, be sure and tell them what you're not saying. So when you want to talk to a thinker about a task that they've done, you say this. Before we talk about this, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you're a terrible wife. I'm not saying that I'm sorry I married you. I'm not saying that you're not a good mother. I'm not saying any of those things. This is what I am saying. And that'll be helpful to you. On the other hand, we said that doers, what they do is their energy level's high. They get out of the bed, they're flying, they're going straight out, and then they just fall into bed and they go to sleep and they get up and go again and go again and go again. Now, one of the things that will be confusing too as we look at this personality is that you've been listening to this and you say, you know what, I don't really just fit into one of those categories. I don't see myself as just one of those. And you're right in seeing that. There are very, very few compulsive personalities that are just straight thinkers, that are straight feelers or straight doers. Everyone's a blend of those. And so you have something that you are primarily, and then you have something that's a secondary. And another thing you'll like about our test with thinker, feeler, and doer is you can copy it and take it and give it to others. You don't have to pay for it. So that's a lot cheaper too. But we have a little test that we give people, and it looks at 3 different areas of your personality. And your personality will shift in the situation. And so in our test, we have over 78 billion different blends. And the new test that we have doesn't have any negative scores in it because negatives just set thinkers off. I got a negative score. What do I do to get it to be a positive? And that wasn't even the point in the test. So we don't have any negatives in our new one. But you can look at the 3 areas. A person will act different in a social environment and under stress. And then their personality will function differently even in the area of affection. But people are blends of these things. So we'll just take a couple of the common blends because you have here the thinker and the doer and the feeler. You have people who are socially a thinker, and let's say that they're a feeler. And those 2 are equal, and then their doer drops down. We call that the amiable person, the friendly person, the disarming person. They're kind of the world's value. And they're always thinking and feeling and thinking and feeling. And when it comes to making a decision, this kind of amiable person will always stall out. And so you take an airplane and you try to climb too quickly and the plane begins to shake, it's stalling. Well, what happens to a thinker and a feeler is that they're very amiable, they're very friendly, they're easygoing, but when it comes under pressure and they're a thinker and a feeler, they begin to stall out and they lay in bed and they think about the situation, they feel about the situation, they think about it, they feel about it. In the end, they're exhausted, but they still haven't made a decision yet. And that can go on for weeks. And that's where they need somebody that's going to give them a little bit of a push. I like the thinker and feeler, though, under stress, because they can be sometimes so slow to make a decision. As I've said, you could tell them, listen, a meteor is going to hit in about 20 minutes and we're all going to die. And their response is, well, we've still got time for another soda. You know, they're not going to get too wound up over that. Now you can have the people then, too, that are thinkers first and then a doer second. And if you're a thinker and a doer, you're a very, very creative person. You have very high standards, and you apply those standards to yourself. And you'll notice that when you were a child and you did something wrong, the people who are coming to you to tell you what you did wrong are late to the party because you saw it a long time before they did. There's no need to punish them over that. You've already seen it. And these people need to lower the standard they have for themselves. Now, if you have someone that's different than that, and let's say that they're a doer and a thinker second, that person has high standards that they apply to others. And they're going to rule the house with an iron fist. And they want everybody to come under them. And if people just followed them and did exactly what they told them to do, the whole house would be running much more smoothly. It would all be running better. And they're frustrated all the time and ready to explode. Then you've got people who are high feelers, and then they're a doer. They have a high emotional need. They have a high need for relationships, but they would like someone to come to them and initiate the relationship. And so those kind of people are really good promotional front-end people that you would have at the front of your office. And they're very, very good with people, but they're good with them if you organize the meetings. So they're a lot more comfortable you organizing the thing than them having to go organize it. They like people coming to them rather than them going out. Where if you have someone who's more of a doer and a feeler, they're out initiating relationships all the time. So I just want you to get a little bit of an idea that we do have blends in this, and those blends work out in a different way. And then under stress, we'll see it differently. In the area of affection, one of the things that you often see in couples is that you'll see people that are very, very high on the feeler, but both of them are midway on the doer. So they're both waiting for the other person to initiate the affection. And one of the things that a feeler hates, because affection for them is acceptance, is any kind of physical rejection. So instead of taking the risk to be rejected, what they'll do is they'll sit back and wait for the other person to come to them. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. You may be married to someone that's a low doer, and maybe they're lower on the feeler, so they're not going to come anyway. They don't need hugs all the time. They don't see why they should come and bring you hugs. Then you have someone over here who's a thinker, and they're not high on the emotional needs. One of the things we always recommend in marriage is that you have, throughout your marriage, a set day for sex and affection. It's a set day that nobody has to worry about it. That you know that that's the day you do that. And as our kids grew up in our family, Saturday morning always belonged to Betty and I. That was our morning. When the kids were small, I'd buy them a box of donuts, and I'd tell them Friday night, your donuts will be there in the morning when you wake up. You can go watch cartoons, you can watch this or you can watch that, but don't bother Mom and Dad, because that's our morning. And that was our morning to talk, and that was the morning for sex, and we did that our whole marriage, because it's already planned. It takes all the risk out of it. That's what you do on Saturday mornings. And it really works. It works well. Now, the other thing you look at is this in the area of affection. If you get an opportunity to take the test, is where are you on the thinker? Because the thinker in the area of affection tells us where you are in list keeping. So you have short list people and you have long list people. And what happens is, if you've got someone who's up here at 12 on a thinker, they have very, very high standards for you. They remember everything that you've done wrong, and their attitude is, why are you trying to kiss me when in 1988 you were rude? And we need to talk about that. Now there's other people that are short list people, but they still need some communication. Because what happened is, you left in the morning angry. They really don't understand why you were angry. You haven't talked about that yet, and now at night you're trying to hug me. Why are you trying to hug me? I'd like to talk about it. It's not a big issue. I'd just like to know what it was. Now, getting the short list resolved is often a lot easier than getting the long list resolved. But there's still things that we discuss and we carry with us. And you'll have people that are really embittered over things that happened years ago, and they haven't understood it, and it's all come about because of this collision between these two bags called our unique self and our past life. So we want to move now, after looking at that, this bag that we're carrying, the unique self. We're going to take a little break and come back and examine a little more what it means to have the self-life, or the past life that we're carrying with us, and how that affects relationships too. So we'll take a little break and come back.